Before we start this video, a large thank you to Guyon, Soren, Jamal the Monster, B. Cullen Ward, Araz, Rune, Eric, Dot, Lung, and Christopher for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. And as always, an immense thank you to Halo Burner for their continued support to the channel this month on Patreon. It is greatly appreciated, my friend, and I hope you enjoy the video. Hello everybody, today we're going to continue with our weapon equipment UI. So let's go to the player UI manager and open up that prefab. Next, let's go down into the equipment manager, and I'm just going to rename this to equipment slots window. I'm going to do that because we're going to have an additional window, so I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to call it my inventory window. Now, when you go to equipment item, helmet, legs, chest plate, or weapon, you're going to open up an inventory window, and it's going to populate with items that are going to relate to what weapon slot you clicked or equipment slot you clicked. For example, if you open up helmets, you're only going to see helmets that are in your inventory. If you open up weapons, you're only going to see weapons that are in your inventory. So this is what this is going to do, basically. I'm going to add a horizontal layout group here, set it to, say, upper left, and I'm going to put a space of 20 between it both. There we go. Not going to spend any time at all on making this look pretty. Let's just get the functionality down first, then we can do that. So I'm going to add a scroll rect to this, and I'm going to add a UI match scroll wheel to selected button. I'm going to set it to clamped, and I'm just going to set all these settings wherever I want. And this is basically going to make it so if we have a bunch of inventory slots that go off the screen, it's always going to center the screen liquidly with the load slots for our characters to whichever slot is currently selected. Now, let's just make a scroll view here, and then we're going to just take all of the things that are a child object of the scroll view and drag them in here and just delete the scroll view. This is easier than manually just making them all ourselves. We don't need the horizontal scroll bar. We can delete that. We're going to go to the inventory window now, and we're going to drag in all of these places. So the viewport and the vertical scroll bar and just whatever else we have here. So again, the scroll component here is for, this window is obviously only so big. So if we have more weapons than we can fit on the screen, we're going to use this to scroll through them all. And we're going to use this UI match scroll wheel to center script that we made before to make sure that we always have the selected inventory slot on screen. So you can mess around with this scroll bar if you want, change the colors, enable disable images so it's invisible, whatever you want to do. Make sure it's not interactive, and make sure you're putting the viewport to the size of your background. So mine is off here. I'm going to see what's going on. It should be in the center, but it's not. So go to your viewport and hit stretch. Make sure it is the size of this window. Now, your scroll bar, you can put it here to the right or to the left, just down along the side. I'm going to change the colors a little bit so it blends in better. There we go. Now your content panel, make sure you drag it in as well. And one note about the content is in the future, we're going to make it so the size of this height-wise is going to be calculated with the script depending on how many inventory slots we have. But for now, don't worry about it too much. Just make it as big as you want. We're going to make it in the future so it auto sets the size for us depending on how many slots we have. But you can see here as I change the size of this, the scroll bar changes. That's because it's directly related to the size of the content panel. But don't worry about that for now. We'll go into a deeper dive on that later on. So let's go into the content panel here and add a grid layout component. Let's go and drop an image in there. You can see what this does. I'm just going to call it test. We're going to delete this. Don't worry about it. If you set it to fixed row or fixed column, you can have it so it has a preset number of each. I'm going to set mine to fixed column and try with 4. And if I duplicate this 4 times, you can see, I think we should probably do 5 at the size. You can set the spacing here too and the exact cell size of each of these. So I'm going to try 5, and 5 looks pretty good. And then I could also change it if I wanted to middle center, or upper center rather, and you can play around in the settings until you get it looking however you want. Again, not going to spend too much time on making it look pretty right now. I'm just going to quickly get it in here, and then we can go back and kind of polish it up later on when the functionality is present. So here is how it looks right now. Now that we have this in a working order, I can delete all these test objects. I am going to go down now into this test object, rename it to inventory slot, and we're going to make the prefab for our inventory slot that will populate this window when it opens up. So if I have 20 straight swords, it's going to populate with 20 straight swords. But now if I have chest armor, head armor, and straight swords, and I click on the weapon slot, I'm only going to see the weapons because I'm switching out a weapon, so it doesn't make sense for me to see the head armor or the body armor, etc. So let's add a script onto this called UI inventory. Actually, we'll call it UI equipment inventory slot because this is only going to be the inventory slot that will appear when you're switching out your equipment. So let's create and add that. Then let's go and drop in using Unity Engine.ui. Let's drop in our namespace, delete the start and update functionality as is per tradition. Let's make a few variables here. So first I'm going to say public image item icon. And then I'm going to make a serializable field. I'm going to make a public item for current item. So this is going to be whatever item is on the slot basically. Then I'm going to add a public image. And I'm going to call this highlighted icon. So this is not needed, but it does make it makes the button look a little bit better. It's just basically going to toggle an image, a highlight image for whatever icon or whatever inventory slot rather is selected. Just like a little, it could be like an overlay or a highlight. Next, I'm going to make a public void add item, make it require an item. I'm going to say if the item is null, we can just simply return and disable the item icon. If it is enabled, you don't need to do this. You can actually just basically disable the game object, but this should never be the case anyway. If it is null, there's a problem, so I just kind of want to see it. So I'm going to leave the game object active. So item icon dot enable is equal to true if it passes those or that check. And then we are just going to simply set the current item to the item that we passed. And we're going to set the item icon to the current item's item icon. So item icon sprite equals item dot item icon. And that's mostly it for just populating the inventory slot with the item itself. Next, let's go over to the UI prefabs and save this as a prefab. So it's called equipment inventory slot. And I just realized this is not a button, this is an image because I was showcasing how this is going to work. So let's quickly make a button and just replace our prefab. That's my bad. We don't need text. We can copy the name. There we go. And now let's go over here and we can copy the component from the image if you want and just paste it here. So copy component, go back here, right click on image and paste component values, and that will be the same color. And then we can just drag it as a prefab. Also, don't forget to add your script to it. So I am just going to paste the name here, delete that, come down here, make sure our script is on it, drag it in, and replace the prefab. All right, cool. So what is next? So we're going to add an image below this, and we're going to call this item icon. And let's just make sure we untick raycast target. It's not going to be a raycast target. We can also just drop down. Oh, we didn't save our variables. So I'm going to go back to the scripts here, save those, drop in our item icon variable here. Now, let's also go over and duplicate this again. Let's make the highlighted icon, and I will put that above the item icon because it needs to be. You need the item icon to be at the front. You want the highlight to be behind it. It's going to make it a red color. Not going to spend too much time on it right now. And then we can save this highlighted icon as its own prefab. So if you ever want to change the highlight color across all of your inventory slots or all of your buttons that use this, you can just change the prefab. So that's what I'm going to do. Now I'm just going to save this. Okay, looks cool. Now let's go back into the scripts here, and right below add item, let's do a public void select slot. What's select slot going to do? It's going to enable the highlight icon. So highlight icon and enable equals true. And then when you want deselect slot, and then we're just going to disable it. Now you could also throw something else in here, like if you want to play a sound effect, this is a good place to do it. But for now, we're just going to get the functionality of equipping weapons. We'll come back and add that polish in the next episode. So let's go and add an event trigger. Whoops, not a system, an event trigger. And you want to add two new event types. You want on select and on deselect. You can see there's a bunch here. So you can use those if you have any other plans to do so. I'm just going to use select and deselect for now. And I am going to say select slot on the select event. And then on the deselect event, I'm going to say deselect slot, which will just enable and disable our highlight image. All right, cool. Looks good. Let's keep on keeping on. Now I'm going to add an onClick event. And let's make a public void for equip item. Because remember, this is the equipment inventory slot, and you're only going to be using this when you're switching out your items to equip them. So on click, we're going to call equip item. Right now that does nothing, but by the end of the video, you're going to be able to use this to change out your weapon for whatever weapon is highlighted in the slot. Save your prefab, always be saving that consistently. Now I am going to go over here now, and if you want to go to the prefab, set the width and height to 100 to 100 if you want, because we're having our width and height set by that grid layout, so it will appear as 0, 0 if you didn't do that already. Let's save that. Go over to the equipment inventory slot prefab. Make sure that you're going over here now and disabling your highlight icon and all that stuff, and make sure all your variables are dragged in. So header, let's go back over to the player UI equipment manager. Equipment inventory, I'm going to make a comment here. So this inventory populates with the basically related items when changing equipment. So if you click on the head equipment slot, this inventory will populate with every head equipment item from your actual full inventory. If you click on the leg equipment slot, this inventory will populate with every leg equipment item from your actual inventory. So I'm going to make a few variables here. The first one's going to be a transform, and it's going to be called equipment inventory content windows. This is just the content section that we have in there. This is where you're going to basically be the parent of all the inventory slots. Next, we have the game object for equipment inventory slot prefab. So this is going to be that prefab that we just made. We're going to duplicate it over and over again, depending on how many we need to throw in there as children of this content window. And we need a couple more things. Next, we're going to require a UI inventory slot array for inventory slots. Hey guys, future step here. I just realized I cut this out in a second, but you don't need that. I was copying Nephilim's code, and this is if you want to have a preset number of inventory slots, which I do. If you want to have unlimited, we don't need that. All right, next we're going to need a current selected item. This is just going to basically keep track of which item is selected. You don't need it per se, but I like to just to keep it there. And next we're going to have a variable for a current selected equipment slot. So this is how we will know what to fill the inventory with. So basically we need to know if we have right hand slot 1 selected, or the head equipment slot selected, or the body equipment slot selected. So let's jump over to our enums. We're going to go to right under equipment model type, make a public enum for equipment slot type. And I'm just going to fill this up with right weapon 1, 2, 3 and left weapon 1, 2, 3. So again, used to determine which equipment slot is currently selected. We need to know that before we populate our inventory. We also need to know that to switch out our weapons properly and our equipment properly. So the examples is helmet, body, legs, right weapon 01, talisman 02, etc. So as I just said, I'm only going to do right weapon 01, right weapon 02, right weapon 03, and left weapon 1, 2, and 3. But the logic is identical for the body equipment, head equipment, etc., etc. So if you guys want to go ahead after this video and do the rest of the armor yourselves, that will be a great learning experience, and I highly encourage you to do so. I'm sure many of you will probably do that anyway, but if any of you are feeling timid or like you're not able to do it, you totally can. You should definitely give it a shot. All right, so back over here, let's take our comment out of here and actually replace it with our variable. Now, going to be a serializable field, equipment type, and you can call this whatever you want. I'm going to call it, I guess, current selected equipment slot will be a good name. There we go, cool. All right, so let's save that, jump over here. Let's make this is on the player UI equipment manager, by the way. Let's make a new public void load equipment inventory. And now, depending on what slot is selected, we're going to load up a different set of items. So we're going to utilize this. And again, we're going to make this an array. So I'm going to come down here under load equipment inventory. And I'm just going to make an equipment inventory window variable, which I don't have made. I thought I did. So up here, if you want to hide this window, basically, when you're not equipping items, make this into a game object equipment window, which I am going to do, equipment inventory window, and just set it as inactive unless you're opening this window. So we're going to say equipment inventory window dot set active is equal to true. We will set that to false when we open the menu momentarily. We're going to do a switch statement next for all of the possible equipment items. So we have right hand weapon 1, 2, 3 and left 1, 2, 3. That's all we have so far. So all these will follow the same logic, though. They're all going to populate the inventory with our weapons. We need to know which one specifically, because when we switch out the weapon, we need to know which hand specifically to assign it to. So right hand weapon 1, 2, 3 and left hand weapon 1, 2, 3 are all going to load the weapon inventory because they are all weapon slots. The only difference is which weapon directly you are equipping that to or swapping out for. So, loading the weapon inventory, what do we do? The first thing we do is make a list of weapon items, and this is going to be every weapon in your inventory. So your inventory comprises all of your weapons, but this is only going to be the weapons from your total inventory. How do we get that? Well, there's a few ways. We're going to do a for loop. Now we want to check our player. Now in Nephilim, I actually save the player variable to my player UI manager and just get it there. But as I discovered recently and I put in the previous video, we can just easily reference our player using netcode. So we're going to say player manager player is equal to, and again, make sure you're saying using netcode like this up here. We're going to reference the network manager dot singleton dot local client dot player object dot get component player manager. There we go. And now we have a player. So let's reference our player's inventory by saying player.player inventory manager .items in inventory .count. And then we're going to get all the weapons by saying weapon item, weapon, this is a local variable, is equal to, then we're going to say player.player inventory manager .items in inventory I as a weapon item. So we're going to get cast. Now if the cast does not return a null, we're going to add that weapon to the list. So basically, we're going down through every item in our inventory. We're casting it as a weapon. If the cast works and it is a weapon, we're going to add it to our list. and then that will get us every weapon in our total inventory. I'm just going to move the player variable up here just for neatness sake. Okay, after we have all of our weapons, what do we do next? We're going to make a for loop again, and we're going to go through every single weapon that we just got from our inventory, and then we're going to instantiate an inventory slot for it. So we're going to say instantiate, and then we're going to pass the inventory slot prefab variable that we saved, and we're going to instantiate it at the transform of our content window, which then it will go into that window where the organizer exists and automatically organizes it for us and makes it all neat. So let's save this as a local variable. So we're going to say GameObject inventory slot is equal to, and why are we doing this? We're doing this so we can access the UI inventory script by getting it as a component from this GameObject. So we're going to say equipment inventory slot is equal to inventory slot.getComponent UI equipment inventory slot. Then we're going to pass the item, the weapon item specifically. I'm going to rename this to GameObject too, so it's a lot more clear. So inventory slot GameObject equipment inventory slot. Then we're going to have equipment inventory slot.add item, and we're going to pass the weapons in inventory I, so the current weapon item. And that will auto-populate your inventory. All right, cool. Let's save that. Now we have to do a few more things. Go over to the player UI prefab, go down to your inventory window and drag in the equipment inventory window. I'm going to rename this so it's exactly the same as the variable name. There we go. And I think we're missing a couple more variables. Yeah, dragging your content window here on the player UI manager. Honestly, dragging anything you're missing, I think I forgot to do a few. Dragging your prefab as well, or select it from the project. Now let's go, and as I said previously, I believe, this variable is not supposed to be here, that's my bad. That was from Nephilim when I was having a 30 limit on the inventory, but we have unlimited, so we don't need that. Let's highlight all of our weapon icons and add an our weapon slots, on-click event, and the on-click event is going to be load equipment inventory from our player UI equipment manager. All right, cool, after that is done, what are we missing here? Go to our equipment inventory window and hide it. And then hide the menu object, save the prefab. Come back here and do the scroll rect. I forgot to add in the scroll rect variable down here and the content panel. So I'm going to drag these in. And I'm going to save this. Now I'm going to go over to the inventory slot and I'm going to drag in my highlighted icon variable and my item icon variable. And I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to the player UI prefab. I'm going to go to my scroll bar and untick interactable. I don't want to interact with that scroll bar. That's done automatically via our script. I'm going to go to open equipment manager menu and disable our equipment inventory window when we open the menu up. I'm going to save that again. Going to go down to our load weapon inventory. We got to do a few more things here. We're going to say if weapons in inventory count is less than or equal to 0, we just want to just simply return and don't open the menu. We can add a warning message to it later on in the future saying you have no weapons or whatever, but for now, let's just disable it. Now you could just disable the game object with this and return, or you can just reopen the menu, which will do that for you. And then if you have any other logic that will refresh your equipment or any of that stuff, that goes off as well. Entirely up to you, both are valid approaches. So right below our weapons in inventory count now, or rather right above it, I'm going to make a bool for has selected first inventory slot. Now, what does this do? I'm going to initialize it false. We can't add our little utility script for selecting an inventory slot on enable because it will select them all. We only want the first. So we're going to do a check in this for loop. If we have not already selected the first inventory slot, we're going to make a button variable called inventory slot button. We're going to initialize that at inventory slot GameObject.getComponent button. And then we're going to select it. And I'm just going to say inventory slot button.select. And I'm going to say inventory slot button.onSelect as well, and pass null because sometimes I find this doesn't actually fire the onSelect events. So I'm going to also set the has selected first inventory slot bool to true, and this will select the first inventory slot that we instantiate under this parent content window. So again, comment, this will select the first button in the list. We can't use our select on enable on our prefab because it would select them all simultaneously. So let's make a private void for clear equipment inventory because we want to do this every time we leave it. So for reopening it, we don't have multiple versions of the same item. And all we're going to do is go through for each transform in the parent object, which is our content window. So the variable is going to be transform. Inside the, what did I name this? The equipment inventory content window, we're going to say destroy, and we're going to pass the item dot game object. So item being the transform. So for every transform under this window, we're going to destroy its game object. And now we can call this too on Open Equipment Manager, so it just refreshes every time we reopen it. All right, cool, we can save that. And I forgot to disable this image under my highlight icon by default. That's my bad. I'm going to save that prefab now. Go back to the player UI prefab. I'm going to make sure I set my content window to anchor to the left side of the screen. It's very important. Otherwise, it'll be kind of drifting up or away. So if you go into the game here now and I open my equipment window, you can see there it is. I have my 3 icons. But we switch our weapons when trying to go through them. That's kind of annoying, so we don't want to do that. So let's go to our player interaction, or sorry, our player input manager. And right where we're handling switch right weapon input and left, we're just going to simply do a check for if a menu window is open. And if it is, we're going to simply return right before we switch the weapon. Okay, then down here too as well. And then we're good to go. We can save that, go back to the project. That should be working as intended. Let's just test it out real quick. Going to open my inventory equipment window, click on this, and there we go. I can cycle through them, and yes, they're not switching. Now, you notice they don't look the same as the item icons. That's because we're not preserving our aspect ratio, which is kind of annoying. They're kind of fat. You can see here, kind of stretched out. We kind of don't want that. For some reason, I'm not seeing the preserve aspect ratio icon here to tick off. So we can just go to the right-hand weapon icon slot and copy the image component. Go back to our prefab and then right-click on the item icon and paste component values. And for some reason, that drops in the preserve aspect ratio. Untick the image again so it's not enabled by default. Save it and get out of there. And now if you open it up, you can see here it is the same size. Cool. Looking good. So far, so good. So next, let's actually make it so we can click on one of these icons up here now and actually change out the weapon. So under equip item, we need to go back here and make this equipment type now public under player UI equipment manager because we need to reference this and know what we're equipping. So change that to public like so. Now over here under our UI equipment inventory slot, we're going to do a switch, and we're going to switch up the switch statement rather for all of the possible inventory slots that we have highlighted. So we're just going to say switch player UI manager instance player UI equipment manager dot current selected equipment slot. All right, let's do one for right now, and let's make sure it works, then we can do the rest because it's going to be a weapon. It's going to be identical to the rest. So first, what do we want to do? We want to get a weapon item variable. We do that by referencing our player's inventory. So let's say using Unity netcode, let's do a trick up here to get the player. We're going to say player manager player is equal to network manager dot singleton dot local client dot player object get component. You get it by now. By the way, a trick, if you want to just do this one time on the player UI manager and then always reference the player from there, that's fine too. It's up to you though. So we're going to get the current right-hand weapon 01 by saying current weapon is equal to player inventory weapons and right-hand slots 0 because that is the first slot for the right-hand weapons. And we're going to say if the weapon ID is not equal to the unarmed weapon ID. So we're doing this because we don't want to add the unarmed weapon to our inventory. We're going to add this item to our inventory. Now, why are we doing this? Well, if we're swapping out right-hand weapon 01, we want to take the one we currently have and throw it back in our inventory. And then we're going to replace it with the one that we want to basically equip now. So again, if it's not equal to an unarmed weapon, we're going to throw that weapon back into our inventory. What do we do next? We're going to say that the current weapon in this slot is equal to the weapon on this inventory slot, so current item. And then lastly, we're going to cast that, by the way, too, as a weapon item. And then lastly, we're going to remove this item from our player's inventory. So player.player inventory manager, I believe we made a function this but didn't finish it. Remove from inventory to pass the current item. Yeah, okay, so let's go finish that function right now. So remove item from inventory, there we go. Now, we have a to-do here for creating RPC that spawns when we dropped it. We're not dropping it right now, we're just removing it, so we don't need to do that right this very second. Items inventory.remove item, that's all we need to do. And let's do a check here too for nulls by using this for loop trick we've used so many times in the past. Okay, so what's next? Save that, jump back over. We're going to do a couple more things here. I'm going to add some comments here under equip item. So if our current weapon is in the slot, it is not an armed weapon, then add it to our inventory. Then replace our current weapon in the slot with a new weapon, and then remove the new weapon from our inventory. And that completes the little cycle. Now, we also want to refresh our player UI equipment screen because we have those item icons that show whatever we're holding in our specific slots. We do that by saying player UI manager.instance.player UI equipment manager.open equipment manager menu. It just reopens it and refreshes it. You can just make a function if you'd rather for refreshing it specifically instead of opening it every time. It's entirely up to you. Now, also, we need to equip the weapon if our current weapon is equal to the weapon in the slot. So we have 3 weapons on our right-hand slot, for example, 1, 2, 3. If we're holding 2 and we change 2, we need to refresh our current equipped weapon. But if we're holding 1 and we change 2, we don't need to refresh it. So you can't just say equip new weapons because we have to sync the network variables. So what we're going to do is say if player.player inventory manager dot current right weapon index, where is that variable? I'm using the wrong variable. So if player.player inventory manager dot right hand weapon index is equal to 0 because this is right hand weapon slot 0, then we know we're holding the weapon in this hand. So if we switch it, we got to refresh it to reflect the new weapon that we changed. We do that by saying player.player network manager current right hand weapon ID dot value is equal to, and we pass the current item dot item ID, and that's it. All right, cool. So I'm just going to make a comment here. Re-equip new weapon if we are holding the current weapon in this slot. So if you're holding weapon 3 in the right-hand slot and you change weapon 1, you're not refreshing it. You won't need to. Let's save that now and let's minimize it and let's go into the game and test it out. So I have my player here and I am going to open the equipment window, hit this button, and then I'm going to switch out for my broadsword. And boom, there we go. It is working as intended. So we still have a few things to do. We have no way to switch between the current selected equipment slots. That's very easy. I encourage you to try that out. And then we're going to do the rest of the weapons. So right hand weapon 2, 3, left 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to learn to unequip them. And we're going to go over and add a couple little polish elements like sound effects and maybe make the UI a little bit nicer. So I strongly encourage you guys to implement the rest of the weapons on your own. And after you've done that, take that confidence and go ahead and try to do the same with the equipment that you can equip to your helmet, your body, your legs, and your hands. And just go do all the equipment slots on your own. It is a great way to learn, and it is a great way to build confidence. I'm sure a lot of you will do that anyway, but if any of you are feeling timid, just go and make the attempt. Worst case, you just wait for the video and then correct it that way. All right, guys, thank you very much for joining me again this weekend. I hope you all have a lovely weekend. As always, an immense thank you to my patrons. It is because of each and every one of you this series continues. So you have my gratitude. I will see you guys in the next episode.